Welcome back to the BitGeek podcast. I'm your host, Ron Avis, and sitting on the couch to my left with me as always is the Prince of Pixel himself,
Nick Wright.
And today we're going to be talking about our 10 favorite Sega Genesis games. So Nick, here we are doing another top 10 list of our favorite games. We've been doing nothing but Nintendo lists because we love Nintendo. But we have had other loves in our lives as far as consoles go. I actually myself go pretty far back with Sega and have been a big supporter of Sega and a lot of their products. And I think other than the 32X, if I'm not mistaken, I have purchased all of their products.
Yeah, you had the Sega CD add-on and...
Yep, it started with the Sega Master System. I actually had that before I had an NES.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I had it before the NES. I picked the losing teams a lot, as we may come to find out in future episodes.
Well, I mean, we can say, you had your TurboGrafx 16, but I had 3DO.
Yeah, I mean, we took chances. Yeah. And we had some fun experiences.
What was it? Was it Bonk that sold you on TurboGrafx?
Oh yeah, Bonk totally sold me. It was the first 16-bit system. Yeah. So that enticed me as well. I wanted to, I was anxious to get that jump in graphics. Yeah. So, I had my NES and loved it, but I was like, I want to, in the magazines and stuff, we're like talking about it quite a bit. It looked cool. The graphics were colorful. But back to Sega, the main reason I was on the Master System to begin with is I really loved Sega arcade games. Yeah. Some of my favorite arcade games at the time were like Shinobi and Hang On and, Afterburner. And they were just like hit after hit in the arcades. So I thought, okay, well, I'm going to get the system that's going to allow me to play the arcades at home. Because the NES never really did that. Yeah. Sega very much catered to that type of audience.
Well, I guess, to be fair, they did early on. I mean, when
True.
Nintendo started out, they had Donkey Kong, Popeye,
You're
Mario
right.
Brothers.
You're
Donkey
right.
Kong
Correction.
Jr.
They did have some.
But we've evolved since then, and the arcades, greatly evolved in that time period. So, anyway.
I went on from Sega Master System, and then interestingly, this is the Sega Genesis list, but just to talk about the Sega Genesis system where I got introduced with that system was, it too was a very early entry into the 16-bit wars. Mm-hmm. They scrapped the Master System because they lost to Nintendo, and they were going to get a head start, and they really went after Nintendo with their campaigns, like the Sega does what Genesis don't. Yeah. And they were intent on grabbing that 16-bit market. And we mentioned the TurboGrafx 16. I remember like in band, we had another guy who was in our section, Jason, I won't say his last name. Jason had a Sega Genesis when it first came out. And he was so into it. And we would have like a little rivalry. It was kind of like the early days of the fanboyism. Mm-hmm. I had invested in the TurboGrafx 16. He had invested in the Sega Genesis, and we would talk about like, well, the Sega Genesis was true 16-bit, because there was the whole thing with TurboGrafx where it was like 2 8-bit processors. Yeah. It looked great, but it technically wasn't a 16-bit. And so I wasn't super into the Sega Genesis, and it wasn't until a couple years later when they kind of got their legs and the console wars really took off. That's when my love for the Sega Genesis really kind of unfolded. And with that, I guess we'll just jump right into our list. Okay. And who gets to go first this time?
Oh, I don't remember what orders, but we'll let you go first.
Okay. All right. So right off the top of the bat, I'm gonna go with Sonic the Hedgehog. It is the game
just get rid of that one right off the bat.
Yeah, just right off. Just it's out of the way. Sonic the Hedgehog is a great game. It was I guess it started the Mascot Wars, where you weren't a successful like 2D like adventure platforming style game unless you had some kind of mascot to sell and push behind it. Obviously, Nintendo was king with Mario, And Sonic just kind of like created a rivalry. Like Mario was off doing his own thing, and Nintendo was off doing their own thing. But all the while, Sega Genesis was like trying to push Nintendo into a fight, and they kind of developed that edgy style that they were so famous for, and really overtook Nintendo for a bit. And Sonic was that perfect mascot for that whole attitude because he was kind of sassy and sarcastic, and he really fit that time period because the Simpsons were big and Bart was sarcastic. It was a very sarcastic time.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot to do with the success of Sonic the Hedgehog as Sega's mascot that kind of launched that whole Mascot War that everybody was like, we've got to have a mascot too. Let's make Bubsy and Arrow the Acrobat.
Yeah. And this whole slew of other wannabes.
All the failed ones.
Yeah.
I don't even think those even would have come to be if not for Sonic being so successful against Mario.
Yep, I agree 110%. It's because of Sonic we had that Mascot War period, pretty much all throughout the 16-bit era, and the Sonic was, I remember, like, I think it came as a bundle. That was the first Genesis I got, came bundled with Sonic.
Yeah. And it's hard to imagine that there was actually Genesis before Sonic.
I know, but it really was. I mean, I think the Genesis came out around 89. And it went about a year and a half, 2 years. I don't think Sonic came out until 91.
Yeah, it was a couple of years.
A couple of years of them just kind of like, we're here. Come on, people, play Sega Genesis. We got better graphics and everything.
Sonic really, when it came out, then the Genesis started flying off the shelves, I think.
We owe a lot as gamers to Sonic because nothing really, jumpstarts quality like good competition.
Yeah.
And Sega was a legit competitor, and Sonic was a really good character, and it was a fun game, and it would have to be because you couldn't just have a sassy character and then it play like crap. It really introduced that whole speed element. It was like another thing that Sega Genesis just used to pit against Nintendo was the speed,
blast processing
and all the buzzwords and stuff that they had championed. And if you've read that book, The Console Wars, I don't know if you've had a chance to check it out.
I haven't.
Yeah, it's fascinating, man. It's a great read, and it's from the perspective of the CEO of Sega, who used to be the CEO of Mattel, I believe. Mm-hmm. And Sega was aware that they were losing the war. They brought him over, and they set up shop in, Sega USA. Sega was So Japan, and Nintendo was too, but they had Nintendo of America was still a pretty strong presence, but not really so much for Sega. And I think that was one of the things too, is the Japanese audience didn't care for Sega. They were just more into Nintendo, I guess. And it kind of, the Sega of America really kind of pulled the success of Sega. So it's really a fascinating story, and I love it a lot. And of course, it goes into Sonic quite a bit. And how, what was it, Sonic Team? The whole office was mostly just Sonic Team. And they were cranking out the sequels left and right because you just couldn't get enough Sonic. And, I say Sonic the Hedgehog. I really ought to just say Sonic games in general.
Yeah.
I want to pay respects to Sonic the Hedgehog because it was such a huge deal, and it was a fun game. But Sonic 2 was a huge deal in its own right.
Yeah, he introduced Tails.
Yeah, you got Tails. It was the first game that actually got a set release date.
Yeah, I remember that was a big deal.
Yeah, it was like Sonic Tuesday or something like that.
Yeah.
And it released in the United States and in Japan at the same time. And if you're not an old gamer like us, you wouldn't understand what a huge deal that is. Everything came out in Japan first. Mm-hmm. Always.
Yeah, sometimes even to the point where I would order it from Japan just because I wanted to have it earlier.
Yeah, you have a history of importing things over. Like, I never once imported anything over. I never got on the phone in the mail order and all that thing. And it just seems so antiquated now, thinking about how people, would bring games over like that.
Yeah, man, couldn't do it like so easily with the click of a mouse button.
Mm-mm.
You had to get on the phone and call.
Yeah, you can just do it on your phone. You're like, done. It'll be here in like a week.
Yeah, and when I say get on the phone, I don't mean get on the phone. I mean,
yeah, you mean like get on the phone. We're old. But yeah, Sonic 2 is a massive deal. And then Sonic 3, of course, came out, and that was big. Sonic CD, which is one of my all-time favorite Sega Genesis / Sega CD games. I'd got to give a shout out to Sonic CD. Could easily be on my top 5 list on its own.
Oh man, I love that intro with it, the song.
Yeah.
Boom.
Oh yeah. You got the little cartoon. This is before the Saturday morning cartoon came out with like Urkel and all that.
Oh.
But it was fantastic, and the game was a lot of fun too. It might actually be my favorite Sonic game, but like I said, I want to give a proper shout out to the whole entire collective of Sonic games, because we're cheaters like that.
Right. I think every list we throw in something that's like,
we do.
Okay, this one's going to encompass like this whole series.
We say we're going to do a list of the 10 best, but we sneak in another 10 almost always. We don't even play by our own rules. But yeah, the Sonic the Hedgehog, I have great memories of that game. I have an old like Polaroid, not Polaroid, but an old picture of I think you over at my house. And we were playing Sonic in the background. If I can find it, I'll dig it up and scan it. Yeah, and and I was like, I'm so fat, and I had such a little husky guy. But it's one of those painful to look at pictures. Just ooh.
I remember going to your house the first time I played Sonic and just
really we were in my
impressed
room playing, and my mom came in and was just like, smile, and we were just like,
what?
We didn't even
Sonic.
we didn't even turn around and cheese. We're just, both of us are just like,
I don't remember the picture being taken.
Hey, it's still on the controller. But yeah, start with a bang. Sonic the Hedgehog, that's my number one, and hand it off to you, sir.
So on to me. So, we were talking about there was actually life before Sonic on the Genesis. Well, that life, I think, pretty much began with Altered Beast.
Rise from the grave.
Rise from your grave.
Oh, man, Altered Beast. It's one of those games that I swear most people remember very fondly. And then when you actually go back and look at it, or even worse yet, try to play it, it's just total hot garbage.
No, yeah, but you can't deny that it's the arcade version. I mean, it's spot on.
It is spot on, and that was the pack-in game for the original Sega Genesis. And I was talking about my friend Jason, who would, try and talk about how great the Sega Genesis was, and that was one of his points. Was, I have Altered Beast. It's the arcade version of Altered Beast. Yeah. Suck it. And I'm like, well, I got Bonk, and he's pretty cool too, I guess. But yeah, Altered Beast was, you can't deny it. Graphically, it's impressive.
They would get powered up, and they'd be so buff, but their head would be so tiny.
Yeah. What's up with that too? They're kind of naked guys walking around. It's very homoerotic. It's Grease, kind of
I mean, it's like
Clash of the Titans.
I mean?
Well, yeah, that too. And so yeah, you power up, and then you turn into a wolf at some point, and then you fight a guy who throws.
I think every board they were kind of a different beast.
I liked the dragon one. Thought he was kind of cool.
Yeah.
I just remember being a dragon and electrocuting eyeballs.
The thing that I remember trying to play it that just seemed so frustrating is their punches and kicks would be so short. There's no length to. Yeah, it's they got T-Rex arms or something. You got to get so close to hit somebody.
It was a frustrating game to play.
But it was fun.
It was fun, and if you had a Sega Genesis, it would be one of those games that you could invite friends over and make them jealous. Because they're playing Sega Genesis in '89 on Nintendo. You're playing, DuckTales or whatever, which is a great game in its own right, but when juxtaposed next to each other, there's a huge difference. So yeah, that's a good pick. I just remember the digitized voice, which was kind of a big deal.
What was it, the boss, when they would say something when you go through the boss fight? I forget what it was.
Something near Doom.
Welcome to your doom.
Welcome to your doom. Yeah. And you'd have to like wait for him to say it before it kicked off the fight. Yeah. And yeah, the power up. Yeah. It really touted, it took advantage of that voice chip quite a bit. And it kind of would get annoying, but I remember being really impressed with it when.
Oh yeah.
And I love the intro of the game too. Where it's like that dun 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 dun. You can feel that bass. And, it was a truly unique game at the time, still pretty unique, and it was a great, pack-in game for a system that struggled for quite a bit. Yeah, I like the memory of that game. So is that all for Altered Beast?
That's number 2 for you.
Well, my number 2, I guess, kind of fits the style, at least art style of goes well with your game, and it's Golden Axe.
Yeah.
Which was another arcade game.
Right?
Yep. And we talked about Sega and my love for arcade ports. I guess the reason I didn't jump right on board with the Genesis is because I was burned by the Master System.
Yeah.
It had a few good games, but for the most part, it was sort of abandoned. And you know how it is when you get an abandoned system. They're just looking forward to the next new thing. Sega was good at that. But with Golden Axe, you got like another good arcade port of a really good arcade classic, and it was your smash 'em like button masher like classic. And I think since the Sega Genesis had those 3 buttons, like one was like an attack, one was like a jump, and then the third one like unleashed some magic.
Yeah.
And you had like your elf and your warrior, and I think there was a girl too.
Valkyrie. Or am I thinking of Gauntlet? I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. But it was neat that you could ride around on like the beasts. It was the attacks were really weighty. I remember like you'd hit a guy and like you clonk him on the head, and it just felt really good. It was very satisfying to beat somebody up in Golden Axe. Kind of like how in Double Dragon 2 is very satisfying to kill somebody in Golden Axe. And it might have been the first really good example of what a home system could do, like multiplayer with that style of game. Many others would follow that were maybe better, but I mean, like I remember the graphics being pretty large. It really was kind of true to the arcade, and obviously I'm remembering it through a lens of nostalgic fondness, but. Golden Axe is one of those games that, like, I think Sega, like, I go with Golden Axe. It's one of the pillars of the original
classic.
Mm-hmm. And it was a fun game. There were sequels to it that were also good, but none as memorable for me, at least, as Golden Axe, the first one.
Yeah.
So that's my number 2.
Okay, so number 2 for me, Spiderman versus Kingpin.
Pretty good game.
Yeah. It's I didn't really play it a whole lot, but I do remember like seeing it and playing it a little bit and just being really impressed by it because you could actually, stick to the wall and climb up the wall like Spider-Man, and it looked like a really fun, great game.
One thing that Sega was really good at and they were very aggressive about was getting really interesting licenses.
Yeah.
Whether it be like a Ghostbusters or Spider-Man, for example, they would get some good licenses and then they would actually make a good game out of it.
Yeah.
The Batman game was pretty decent.
Like if Nintendo would have that license too, but it'd be a totally different game.
Well, that was because Nintendo, that was part of like an agreement. If you made it, yeah, Nintendo stipulated that if you made a Batman game on their system as well as another system, it had to be a different game. Mm-hmm. It was very strange. Nintendo was full of those. I think I learned that from that book too, by the way. Yeah. Plugging that book again, man.
Yeah, see, I didn't really realize that. I knew so many were completely different games.
Yep, that was Nintendo. That's what they wanted.
And often it seems like overall, I would say I like Nintendo better, like Super Nintendo, Super Nintendo versus Genesis. But on many of those where they were like the same brand but on a totally different game, I like the Genesis one better.
I did too. And it shouldn't have been better.
It shouldn't have been, no.
Everything about the Super Nintendo was superior. Everything.
So that's weird, but anyway.
But they really knew how to program on that system. I mean, they had it inside and out. It was a really, really solid system, and I have a lot of good fond memories, and I guess I'm a Nintendo fanboy, but which is funny too, because like I said, I chose Master System over the NES and TurboGrafx over Super Nintendo. But I mean, I understand the error of my ways.
I like all games.
I do too. When you're younger and you can't afford to get them all, it's easy to fall into that trap of fanboyism and getting in, like between me and my friend I spoke of earlier.
When I was in middle school / high school, I guess 16-bit was more high school. That I mean, if you are forced to choose, well, I'm gonna have to say Nintendo,
right?
But I mean, I like them both. I always liked them both.
Yeah, me too. But yeah, the back to the Spider-Man game, it was neat. The graphics were really good. I liked how like Spider-Man could cling to stuff.
Yeah.
He would do those classic Spider-Man poses from the comic books and emulate them very well. And over the years, Spider-Man games have been very hit or miss, but when they hit, they're awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a good one. You got a lot of the classic villains from they put in there. Obviously, Kingpin. I don't think I ever actually got to Kingpin. And if I'm going to be completely honest with you, I didn't play that game a whole lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I didn't really either, but it stands out in my mind. I always, when I think of Genesis, I think of like that game, and like there's Doc Ock was like one of the early bosses, I think, and it's just
it's like Altered Beast.
It's just a classic Genesis game.
When you see a list of many top 10s or many top 10 lists out there, like on the internet, for example, that's a game that I see a lot of. Yeah. And there was even a Sega CD version too, and I wish I'd played that, but I never did.
Yeah, I didn't even realize there was a Sega CD version. I mean, what did it have different? Like better audio? I don't know.
It probably had some full motion video scenes, like shoved in there or something. Yeah. That's what they did a lot of times. It was a disappointment. Sega CD. See previous episode. That's a good list. I think that's an important pick because I think it allows you to realize or appreciate how smart Sega was with their licensing. Like they were good at that. Even with celebrities, like they had Joe Montana and like Tommy Lasorda, they would always try and get a celebrity, and maybe that was in their failing too. Like it wasn't until like they brought in games like Sonic that Sega really started moving ahead. But I always thought it couldn't have hurt them to get these good licenses in.
Oh yeah, and
it doesn't hurt that it was a good game.
So number three for
me is Streets of Rage 2. Which
now, you specifically say 2 over. We're not doing like Streets of Rage, Encompass.
There was a 1 and a 3 also, I believe, and they were both fine games. But Streets of Rage 2 to me is the masterpiece.
Yeah.
The characters are the characters stand out quite a bit. The moves stand out quite a bit.
Blaze was hot.
Blaze was hot. She wore that little mini skirt, still kicked ass.
Yeah, and doing those high kicks in the mini skirt.
Yeah. What is it with like that slutty appearance at like all those fighting games? Like, I mean, I'm sorry, these girls had to fight with wearing next to nothing, like fishnets and.
My biggest memory of Streets of Rage, and really this is more 1 and not 2. Is when you worked at that video store and we had that big screen TV, and it was just like the Genesis was hooked up to that TV, and so it was playing through a track mode and just looping like all day long.
Yeah.
I guess I was over there like waiting for you to get off or something, like we were gonna go out or something. And it was.
Are you talking about Video Vault?
Video Vault.
Oh my god. Well, that was a blast from the past.
Couldn't remember the name of it until you said it, but yeah, when you worked at Video Vault, and it would just like loop through the attract mode over and over and over.
Yeah, you're pretty sick of it.
I mean, I'm sure you remember that more than I do. I remember it looping like that.
I remember we weren't supposed to play Genesis games on that TV. That was something that the boss had found out. He'd been really mad. Yeah, we were supposed to play only Disney movies 24/7, but when it was late, and it was just like me and like Danny or whatever, like another friend of ours. We bust out the Sega Genesis and hook it up to the big screen TV and have a good time. Because nobody ever came in.
And I don't even remember, we weren't even playing on it. It was just looping through that attract mode. And so I was just listening to it.
It's a funny little memory to jog the memory of that game specifically. Not even the game I mentioned, just Streets of Rage.
Yeah, I mean, think of Streets of Rage and I think of the Video Vault.
Funny how our mind works. But yeah, that game, I've beat it so many times. Some of these games on the list that we mentioned, I have vague memories of it. I remember I liked it and I played it, but this game I remember beating again and again and again.
You know, I'm not even sure if I've beat it. I mean, I'm sure I played through it and beat it with you, but I keep, if I try to think of it, I meld together Final Fight with it.
Well, Final Fight's, it's interesting that you mentioned Final Fight because it was meant to be
It's
the Sega
Sega's
answer.
Final Fight.
Yeah, it was, and it was better than Final Fight. I mean, Final Fight had like maybe prettier, bigger graphics, but they didn't have Guy. And I'll be damned if I'm going to play Final Fight without Guy.
Yeah,
you know,
the Sega Final Fight had their own 3 people.
Yeah. What was with Nintendo, man?
I don't know, something about
and then they released a Guy edition.
Not enough memory. Well, but they took out. I think they took out Cody to put Guy in. They never could have all 3.
Just keep screwing the pooch on that again and
Final
again.
Fight Guy and Final Fight.
Yeah, and I'm not bagging on Final Fight. I was a huge Final Fight fan. Loved the arcade, and it was fun on Super Nintendo as well. Again, we had both systems. We enjoyed both sides. But I think I enjoyed. I think Streets of Rage 2 is a better console game. Final Fight was a better arcade game. So yeah, that's Streets of Rage 2, and it's actually available on. There's a great line of 3DS games that are pretty reasonably priced, and some of these games we're mentioning are available in full 3D. You can get them on the 3DS. Streets of Rage 2.
Oh, with the little 3D gimmick.
The little 3D gimmick. They're still.
I didn't realize that.
Mm-hmm. And they're, like I say, they're cheap.
Was Streets of Rage 3? Did that have a kangaroo?
I remember it had like a little dude on rollerblades. I don't remember a kangaroo.
I wonder what I'm thinking of. That had a kangaroo.
A kangaroo?
Yeah.
The Australian
I know Tekken
Streets
did.
of Rage.
Tekken had a kangaroo. Roger.
All right. Oh, I remember Roger very much so. Yeah.
And there's a kid with rollerblades. That's right.
Was Roger something you unlocked though? Was he on the select screen?
He was a hidden character.
Yeah. Okay. Got Streets of Rage 2. It's a really fun game, and it's available in lots of places. You can find it everywhere. That's my number 3. Nick, what about you?
Okay, I'm doing the all-encompassing, like we do, Disney games. So like there was the Lion King and Aladdin. And these are specifically where we were talking about when there was on the Super Nintendo and the Genesis. Mm-hmm. The Genesis version was better.
It was so much better.
Yeah, I mean, like Aladdin. I guess there's a Lion King on Super Nintendo. I don't
Probably
remember it at all.
I mean, they would port it.
I did play Aladdin on Super Nintendo, and it was a fine game in its own right, but it wasn't like the Genesis was like just like the cartoon.
The frames of animation in those games were astounding, man.
Yeah,
they actually employed Disney animators.
The Super Nintendo had more colors and better colors, but yeah, the Genesis was Disney animation.
Mm-hmm. Very Disney quality. A lot of those games, I can admit they were fine looking games.
They didn't always play that great, but they looked great.
That Aladdin game though was amazing. That was one of those games that kind of got the ball rolling even further for Sega Genesis too. Like they had Sonic, they had some momentum.
Yeah.
But it was that like games like Aladdin, which is funny because movie licensed games are typically shit. They are. They're just not very good. And so Disney had their own studio too at one point, and those games weren't great. But Sega always had good Disney games, even going back before Aladdin.
Oh yeah, like the Mickey Mouse and the
Castle of Illusion.
And
Donald. There was a Donald Duck game.
Yeah, there was Mickey and Donald and Donald Duck Quackshot.
Yep.
Something like that. Yeah, there's a lot of Disney games.
And even before that huge breakthrough they had made with Aladdin, I mean, those games were quality games. They looked good.
Mm-hmm.
They looked like cartoons. So again, if I'm seeing a theme develop here, it's that Sega was good at locking down those exclusive titles, those licenses, and putting them to good use. Was there like a Bonkers game or that's like a Disney afternoon? There was, I'm sure, but these were like the movie games specifically.
Yeah, I don't really remember Bonkers, but I think there was.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good cheat. I'm gonna allow it, especially since I did Sonic. Cool. All right.
Yeah. So
Moving on to number 4. For me, it's gonna be. I'm sorry, man. This is gonna probably fly over you, and you're not gonna. I'm sure you can appreciate it, but John Madden Football once again cheating, but you have to cheat because John Madden Football was one of those series where it was just iteratively better, and they would just update the licenses or I'm not the licenses, pardon me, the rosters. That was always the reason to buy a game. They throw in like little quality of life enhancements from here and there. Like there's more animations and tackling animations, and now you can run the ball better. But it was all about just seeing like your favorite players. And once again, the Genesis version, and this is not even just my opinion, like everybody knew if you're going to play a Madden game, it had to be on Sega because it was just not as good on Super Nintendo. The graphics had that, sharpness to them. It was more colorful, and the shading and things like that. The sprites were fine, but for some reason they just couldn't lock down the controls. But on Sega Genesis, John Madden was just like the way to go. It seems like everyone I knew that played Madden always had it on Genesis. And the only time I think I even ever tried a Madden game that wasn't on Sega Genesis is when like PlayStation came out. And there was like some exclusivity thing going on where it was not going to be on the Saturn, but it was going to be on PlayStation. And they updated it quite a bit. Obviously they would because of the polygons and stuff. But for years and years and years, Madden reigned supreme. And I guess if I had to pick like one of the best years, like if you're a hockey fan, NHL 94 is like one that people talk about. I know.
Sports.
Madden 94, Madden 95, those were like my favorites. So, huge shout out to Madden. I don't really have a lot anecdotally to talk about with Madden, just that I tell you what though, I will say that my Sega Genesis was primarily my Sonic/EA Sports machine. I would get the NBA games. I even got the hockey games a couple times. And I don't even care about hockey. The college sports games, but mainly Madden was like the cash cow. They were able to do all those other games because Madden was so popular. All my friends in high school, it was a high school thing. Mm-hmm. It was around the time that I was in high school, and friends would come over and we would have like playoffs, like we would pick a team, we'd pick our favorite team. I was always the Lions. Our friend Danny was always like the Chiefs. I'll edit that out. But I mean, yeah, like everybody had their favorite team. We'd have like playoffs. And another really neat thing about the Madden games was if you didn't have your friends to do your own playoffs, there was a playoff system in place to where you're playing your game, and just like a real football game, they would flash scores of other games that would be going on, like on a regular Sunday telecast of a football game. Blew my mind. Like here I am playing my game, and it's like Raiders 14, Seahawks 10, third quarter. Like that is so awesome. And it would update along, kind of similar with the, if I was in the fourth quarter, they would update a game in the fourth quarter, and they would constantly flash that. Like that blew my mind. It was the attention to detail in those Madden games were the best. Cool. So, anyways, that's going to be my long diatribe on John Madden Football. My number 4 could even possibly be the main reason why I had the Sega Genesis. Sonic would probably be in the first. Anyways, that's my number 4. Nick, what's your number 4?
Earthworm Jim.
Oh, damn. That's another great game.
Earthworm Jim, man. I remember when that game first came out, and just the animation was amazing.
The humor,
the audio, Tommy Tallarico, did all the audio on that. It was just.
What happened to Shiny Games? They were such a big thing at that time. I don't know. I guess they ran out of Earthworm Jim ideas and just couldn't propel that on.
Man, just Earthworm Jim. You got to be honest. It played. The controls were pretty loose. It was difficult to play. But
a little bit, but it was so
great game though.
The controls maybe were a little bit loose, but I really loved the idea of like having like these different types of because he would use his head like he was a worm in a exoskeleton like suit, like big muscular like suit, and he would use his head as a whip, and he had that like little gun as his other secondary weapon. And remember the part like in the first level, and I love this about Earthworm Jim. You launch the cow, and then way later in the other,
it
like
comes
at the end,
back at the
it
end.
comes back. I mean, you didn't see that in games back in those days. I mean, there was like true continuity.
Princess, what's her name?
Yeah,
and I can't remember the queen's like full name. It was like super long, but slug for a butt.
Yeah, they had a really good thing going with that sense of humor, right? And it is another, again, like you said, it was one of those games that it was out on Super Nintendo.
But the Genesis was like the definitive version, though. It came out first on Genesis.
Yeah.
It didn't come out till a little bit later on Super Nintendo. And when it did come out on Super Nintendo, it was missing one of the boards. I forget which one it was now. Like, was it the one where you're on like a bungee cord of snot? Was it that one?
You know what? It makes sense if it was, because that'd be like one of those questionable like content type things.
Well, I don't think it was a thing about questionable content. I think it was just something about memory restraints. Like if the audio was using up too much memory or something or other. I forget what. I've read about it before, and I forget now what the reason was. But yeah, it was
there were some technical limitations there, right? Like even. What, like the pixels, like the resolution?
There was something about the resolution that the Genesis, because it was made for the Genesis.
Yeah.
And so that's the true like resolution, and the Super Nintendo version is like squished a little bit.
So yeah, it like got ported over to Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
And once again, even though the Super Nintendo is superior in so many ways, it couldn't keep up. And I really don't think it was blast processing. I just think they were able to squeeze more with what they had with the Sega Genesis. Like, they took more advantage. And the Super Nintendo was, they would take advantage in other things, like sound. I mean, Genesis could not even hold a candle to the Super Nintendo in sound. And they had their own little tricks up their sleeves, like Mode 7, FX chips.
The Super Nintendo version had like prettier backgrounds, because it would have like more colors and more effects like in the background for Earthworm Jim. But still, it was just a better game on Genesis. And then it came out on Sega CD.
Never played that one either.
Oh, I've got it. It's good. It's got even better audio. It's got like another new board. That's the definitive version right there, is on Sega CD.
I was going to say, like, you would get those definitive type editions, like, on Sega CD, because they would try to port over some of their, like, well-known franchises over to Sega CD. They just didn't do it fast enough. And but I remember seeing that game, but I don't think I ever bought it. So I was plenty happy enough with Earthworm Jim, and there was a sequel, and it was good, too.
Yeah. Earthworm Jim 2 was good, but it wasn't as memorable as the first game.
Yeah, once you it's like the Matrix. Like, you see something like totally unique for that first time, and then others come out and copy it, and they try to just give you more of what was special. But after a year or two, you're just sort of like, that's great, I'm gonna buy that, but it didn't have that same wow factor that the first one had. And, magazines making a huge deal out of things, like Earthworm Jim, I see on the cover. I'm like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
And out of the blue came Earthworm Jim and Shiny. I mean, it was such a huge deal. I remember the developer, and they haven't done anything in 20 years at least.
I don't know.
So yeah, Earthworm Jim is a great pick. Could have used Earthworm on my list as well. Does that bring us to 5?
Yeah, 5.
Okay, man, I really struggled with the 5th. I have some shout-outs. I mean, we like to do shout-outs, I think, right around here. So I want me just mention it in passing, not going to spend too much time. I wanted to shout out Dragon's Lair for Sega CD. It was on my list originally, but I feel like I've just been talking about Dragon's Lair so much.
Yeah, everybody knows you like Dragon's Lair.
I love Dragon's Lair.
I like Dragon's Lair.
A headline there for you. And the Sega CD version was the definitive home version.
Who doesn't like Dragon's Lair?
I don't know. I've never met anybody that didn't love Dragon's Lair. Such a legendary game. So yeah, that's one of my shout outs. I wanted to give a shout out also to and this is like a shout out that I know it's like a recognition shout out. Not that I really played it because I didn't, but Gunstar Heroes, I just want to give you like your due. Like I understand Gunstar Heroes.
Yeah. It's always one. Anytime you see any kind of a Genesis list, it's one of them on there.
Yeah, sometimes it's number one, and it's always in the top 10. So, fans of Gunstar Heroes, and it's also one of those 3DS games. I need to just buy it and play it. I'll probably love it. But for whatever reason, I just never picked it up. Do you have any shout-outs you could think of?
I don't know. I mean, there's Ghostbusters, Jurassic Park, Tasmania.
Oh, I like Tasmania quite a bit. I love the hand-drawn like graphics of that were fantastic. Again, probably came out for Super Nintendo, but looked better on Tasmania.
When you think of Genesis, you think of Toe Jam and Earl, but I didn't really ever play it.
Yeah, Toe Jam and Earl was like they were really trying to find their identity, I think, and it did give them like it was to get people talking about the Genesis, and it was very unique, and it was just more of an artistic game.
Yeah,
it was that funk. They really focused, I think, more on the characters themselves, and when you actually play the game, there's not much to it.
Yeah.
So
there was like Sega had like their own version of Mortal Kombat. They had the Eternal Champions.
Yeah, that's another game that I don't even remember if I even ever played it, but I recognize that it was a big deal to a lot of people. Yeah. It was like you said, it was like kind of their clone of Mortal Kombat. Came out around the same time as Mortal Kombat 2. People can't get enough Mortal Kombat, so if you have a quality title, it's going to get some attention. People are going to get it.
And I think that was one that actually was fairly successful. Because there were other, Mortal Kombat clones. Like what was that one? Like Weapon Lord or something.
Yeah, and then you got games like Clay Fighter and
well, and that was, Clay Fighter, that's not really so much Mortal Kombat clone. It's just the
fighting game. The digitized graphics, you're right, yeah.
It was just, Street Fighter was big, and so everybody's making fighting games.
What was that awful one on 3DO?
Oh, Way of the Warriors.
Yes! Oh my god, that game was pure shit. But yeah, that's a perfect example. Like people would just take those digitized actors, put them in a game like Mortal Kombat, and sell.
Yeah, that was.
But Eternal Champions was quality. You could recognize that it was a good game.
Yeah,
it wasn't just some piece of crap that was shoved out to try and capitalize on the Mortal Kombat craze. So good shout out there. So anyways, those are. And Ghostbusters was a cool one.
Oh, wait, Ghostbusters just because Ghostbusters.
Enough said. Okay, so my number 5 is going to be a little racing game called Hard Driving.
Hard Driving, yeah.
Remember that one in the arcades?
In the arcades, yeah. I didn't really play it on Genesis, but yeah, I loved Hard Driving in the arcades. It was like a simulator.
Yeah, it was one of those games, like, I remember walking into Aladdin's castle, and they would feature that new game in the front. And it sat there in the front for quite a while. And for us, we were, like, in those, near old enough to drive years. Mm-hmm. So when you get a game like Hard Driving, it was, like, such a really faithful simulation to driving. I think Hard Driving is the reason why, like, all of my vehicles to this day have been manual transmissions. Yeah. I love getting in that car and playing with that manual, the gear shift. It felt so right, and there was a clutch.
How did the Genesis handle the polygon graphics?
It was fine.
Yeah.
It was a pretty faithful translation graphically. Obviously, what it was missing, though, was that experience of sitting in a seat.
Yeah, you
with
just got the control.
Yeah, you didn't have a wheel. And that wheel, too, was very, like, stiff. Like, if you were skidding and, like, the force feedback on that wheel, you felt it.
Yeah.
So you're missing that, too, with, like, a Sega Genesis game. But it was an experience kind of game, but the graphics were really good. It was fun. I remember always like starting out with that loop to loop.
Yeah.
You'd start out with a loop to loop, and you'd do a ramp, and then you'd go up on like a bank, like in like a NASCAR style bank, and it was like a short time limit, so you didn't get to play the game very long, if I recall.
Yeah, I know. Every time I played it, it was very short.
Yeah, and you would stall if you didn't know how to drive a clutch. Like you'd stall out. I mean, I think you could do manual or automatic 2 maybe. Maybe it was only manual transmission.
Yeah, that one I don't really remember. Daytona USA, I remember being able to pick manual and automatic.
For sure.
Daytona.
But it didn't have a
But we're not
clutch.
talking about it,
So
though.
like, yeah, if you didn't know how to, like, if you pop a clutch just like on a real car, like your car would die, and you had that short timer. And also too, there was stunts involved, and if you like screwed up the loop to loop, it would go to this dramatic like replay.
Oh yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah.
And it was like dun 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 dun. You know, like, and you get to see like from another perspective how, you know, you screwed up. So, you know, it was one of those like it was more expensive to play. It was a lot of fun. And this pick may be more towards remembering the arcade,
Yeah.
but it was decent. I know I got further in the game thanks to not having to pay more money and getting to try lots more times. So I got to experience it a lot more, and it was fun. It really was a fun game on the Genesis. Like, I stand by that pick. It was a good game. So that's my 5.
My number 5.
Yep.
Bonanza Brothers. Remember Bonanza Brothers?
Bonanza Brothers.
That's
Yeah,
an old school game.
that is a really interesting
Old school
game.
Sega.
Another arcade game.
Yeah, another arcade game. A good port of the arcade game on the Genesis.
Very faithful.
But yeah, and you know,
It had that-
sneaking around. That's the whole point of the game. Sneaking around, don't get seen, steal the
Hide behind stuff.
yeah,
like the
hide behind
doors.
stuff.
Yeah.
Steal the jewels, escape. It's
Mhm.
fun.
And it had that kind of rendered, kind of 3D
I really like that
models.
style.
It was really
a
effective.
very simplistic kind of look to it. I really like the style.
That's a good one, and I think they had that game at like Walmart or something, and we're pretty sure we both saw it.
That
there.
was, I think, my introduction to it.
Mine as well.
I think, well, and you knew it was at that Walmart, and you took me over there one day,
Yeah,
and
you gotta check this
and that
game
was
out,
the
man.
first time I'd seen Bonanza Brothers, and I loved it. Yeah.
It seemed like, oh, that's got to be like a Nick game. I know you'd appreciate the art style and things.
Yeah.
And you know, it was kind of a throwback to an old classic arcade from like where you're on a level and you got to reach another level, and it felt like a throwback to an old style arcade game.
And it had like depth to it because
Yep.
you would like hide into the background.
It wasn't
and
flat.
then step forward
Mm-hmm.
and go. Yeah, because you could dodge bullets. Somebody would shoot, like, and it would be so slow, little ball, and you would just like sidestep.
Yeah, it's you know, it's one of those games where like it sticks in your mind for the visuals, and the gameplay was good too. And I have to give it props because it was a different type of game. You know, like when I see games like Bonanza Brothers, like I'm reminded of games like Cuphead that's coming out for the Xbox.
Oh,
You know, games that try to do something different
Mm-hmm.
and have a unique style of animation to it. And they deserve to be played.
I
And,
really like Bonanza Brothers.
yeah, that's a good respect pick right there. You know, there you mentioned all those shoutouts that could have easily slid in there.
Mm-hmm.
Road Rash was another one of my shoutouts.
Oh yeah.
Just a fun game where you just beat the hell out of people riding a motorcycle down a highway. And the fun thing about Road Rash was the wipeouts. Like if you get hit by a car, like your dude would like smack on the pavement and slide into a tree like way down. Anyway.
You know, I mean, you can't even really talk about Sega racing games without even mentioning like Outrun, Hang On, Super Hang On.
Yeah, but you know what? Those games, I don't really think got a 16-bit.
Yeah,
version.
I mean,
they were like Master System games.
they're more, well, and I guess this is just me not really playing Genesis a whole lot coming out, where I'm familiar with these games in the arcade and just know that they're Sega arcade games.
Now, there was this really good Sega Genesis racing game called Super Monaco GP that was like Formula One, and that was really cool because I remember racing, you know, and there were rear view mirrors, and you could see like the cars behind you in the rear view mirrors.
Oh, yeah.
It's a very novel thing for the time.
Afterburner, I mean, that was on Genesis.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. There were like sequels to Afterburner that came out for Genesis. A huge collection of arcade ports, you know, and sequels. You know, like we didn't talk about Shinobi. Like there were like lots of Shinobi games.
Shinobi, yeah, I love Shinobi.
As a huge fan of the original Shinobi arcade game, when it came to the Sega Genesis, it kind of took on a whole new, like,
There was Revenge of Shinobi. I guess that was the sequel.
And Shinobi's done that over the years too. Like Shinobi kind of got reinvented once again on the Xbox, and it was that kind of 3D kind of style game where it was very difficult. So every time Shinobi like jumps to a new system, it kind of reinvents itself. But those games were fun. You know, I don't remember a whole lot. I don't think I played Revenge or Shinobi because I probably took a look at it and go, "That's not Shinobi." I was a snob. I was a Shinobi snob. But lots and lots and lots of good games. The system went for a long, long time. You know, it clung to life with the Sega CD and the 32X. But a historic system, a system that jump-started console wars, the concept of a console war. And, you know, really for the first time, you know, Nintendo was taken aback. Like they were just like ruling things for so long. And I love Nintendo, and I know they're responsible for jump-starting games, you know, at home.
After the crash.
After the crash. Like we have Nintendo to thank for so many things as far as like how things work, even to this day, are because of Nintendo. So, but Sega Genesis, our hats off to you. That's
Hey, a little trivia. You know what Sega stands for, right?
no,
You don't know what
no, I don't.
service games. Like the SE is service, and then GA games.
Huh.
Sega.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. That's a bit of trivia for me.
I figured that would have been in the book, the Console Wars book. It's
No,
not.
no, they didn't. They never mentioned it. They delve into a lot of history on both sides for Nintendo and Sega, and even some PlayStation. I'm going to recommend everybody check that book out. It's awesome. It's a great book. So yeah, that's our list of our 10 favorite Sega Genesis games. In our mind, the top 10, even though we didn't go 10 to 1.
Yeah, our personal favorites.
Yep. Just a little bit of, you know, not related to Sega Genesis, a little housekeeping. We do have a Facebook page. It's The BitGeeks. So, you know, if you go to like facebook.com or whatever /The BitGeeks. We do have an Instagram too, but, you know, it's also The BitGeeks, but we aren't really posting too much on that. I haven't found a utility for it quite yet. Facebook seems to do the job pretty well. Also, thanks to everybody for subbing. You know, like we are officially over 1,000 subscribers now, I think. And over 10,000 views. The site's been really gaining popularity, it seems. So thanks a lot to all you guys.
I think Logan helps with that.
Maybe he does. Yeah. Maybe he's telling all of his friends at school and I just don't know it. So until next week, that's been our show. Anything else?
No.
All right.
See you next time.
Thanks for watching.